So, okay, so anyway, to kind of get started, we went through the Oedipus stuff, so I'm not going to repeat that. First, under free will fatalism, I think we went through that in a lot of detail last time. If somebody missed it, pull up the Tegrity file where I went through the question pool in detail. Well, determinism, how does it relate the past to the future? Well, basically, and here we're into the scientific notion of free will, whether the causal laws of the universe force our actions, force our choices. So how it relates to past and the future is basically that a unique causal history, a unique causal past determines a unique future. In other words, if the causes are the same, the future is always going to be the same. Hard determinism says there is no such thing as free choice, and its view is incompatibilism. In other words, it holds that the claim that we are determined in all our choices by the laws of nature is incompatible with the claim that we have enough free will for moral responsibility. Basically, for them, we have no free will. And the deep inner conviction, again, that we have, that we can deliberate, that we can make our choices. I went over this in some detail when I looked over the essay question. For people like de Holbach, who's a hard determinist, this deep inner feeling that we have, our common sense intuition that we're making free choices, is simply wrong. It's simply an illusion, And so, and of course, the connection with personal responsibility is that we basically have none. I mean, this is what Clarence Darrow was getting at when he says the real causes for these boys' actions is somewhere behind them in their causal past. And we saw you can talk about genetics versus environment as two ways of deciding whether we're determined. But of course, real hard determinism gets down to the molecular level, and it says that, there's only one way, according to the laws of nature, that the atoms and molecules can be combined and that they will react with one another. And basically, this means that the laws of nature are so strict for the causal determinists, for the hard determinists, that they will always guarantee a unique future given a unique past. And so everything about us is determined by our causal past, by atoms and molecules. And of course, the view of hard determinism then is that in principle, and that's an important word, in principle, if a unique causal past determines a unique future, if we knew all of the relevant details about your causal past, we could predict what you will do in the future. And this is nothing that an ordinary human being has access to, but from the standpoint of a superhuman creature like Laplace's demon, and Laplace is another hard determinist, who does have information about the position of all the atoms in the universe at a given time, and can calculate then, because it also has information about the laws of nature, can calculate where those atoms and molecules will be for any future time you want to say. So for them, even though we can't predict what you're going to do this afternoon, that doesn't mean you have free choice. Presumably, a superhuman creature like Laplace's demon could predict what you're going to do this afternoon. You know, so that's hard determinism. And while you have people like the Holbach, and you do want to review that, you know, at least review your highlight on the Holbach. I don't have specific stuff down on the review sheet. But, you know, when he says nature has described a line that we have to follow in life and we can't swerve from it, it's saying every choice we make is determined. We can't swerve from it for one instant. And so the result for him for our ordinary morality is that morality preaches virtue to somebody in vain. They're either determined to be virtuous or determined to be a scoundrel or somewhere in between by the laws of nature, and nothing regarding their free choices makes any difference, because they don't make any free choices, you know. And so again, hard determinism is a perspective Darrow took. Now, this makes it very unpalatable to a lot of people, not just to the ordinary person on the street that the Holbach is trying to shock with his article, but it also makes it unpalatable to many professional philosophers. So they've tried to find a way that we can still talk about moral and legal responsibility. And hence we get soft determinism, or also called compatibilism, the view that moral responsibility is compatible with determinism and vice versa. Folks, I'm trying to talk through here. And so at any rate, the way that they fit them together is basically to make a distinction between metaphysical freedom, which is the freedom we have to go against the laws of nature. You know, this would be the kind of freedom that Augustine thinks we have, that Descartes thinks we have, that Immanuel Kant thinks we have. And the point is, they say, soft determinists say, no, we don't have that kind of freedom, but all we need for moral responsibility and legal responsibility is moral freedom. And there are some subtleties, as I said, where you see TC under compatibilism. That stands for traditional compatibilism. That is all that we looked at. There are some more complicated versions of compatibilism that a text I used when I then made up this review sheet from at the time goes into, but we didn't. But basically, moral freedom means I have the freedom of choice and I'm responsible for my actions if my actions result from some choice that's motivated by some psychological state, either by a belief, a want, a desire, something that's mine. You know, in other words, I'm sitting up in my office and I know somebody's fixing coffee down there. I have the freedom to follow my desire and go down and get a cup of coffee, and I acted freely. No one coerced me. So what, according to a soft determinist, then is an unfree action? Well, basically, they would say that it's an action that we're in some way coerced to do, either from the outright threat of physical force, right? Somebody comes up to you at a red light, flashes a gun and says, I want your vehicle, you know. Well, you know, you're going to give him your vehicle unless you're an idiot, but it's not something you wanted to do, right? And so you did not freely choose to do that. Or the other example I gave is if a bank robber gets into your vehicle and forces you, you know, to run red lights to get away from the police, we don't hold you responsible in a court of law for running red lights and speeding if somebody has a gun in your side, right? But it doesn't have to be physical force, the threat of physical force. We're also unfree if we're an accountant, say, and our employer is pressuring us to fudge the figures on the next quarterly report to make the company look better than it really, you know, was that quarter, under the threat of losing your job if you don't, you know. And so this is coercion, you know, of a different kind. So compatibilism, so it relates to personal responsibility in that it says that moral freedom is all we need for personal responsibility, and we have that if we act according to our desires, wishes, beliefs. So it's two conditions for freedom. Skip that. I'm not going to ask you a question about that. So I'm responsible then for actions that result from some inner psychological state or motive for the traditional compatibilists. So an action is free, as we said, if it's not forced by something inside, if it comes from a decision I make within my own psychological makeup. And basically, it's one thing. I used to not care for compatibilism at all, but it is true that it's very close to the standard used in regular courts of law, right? I mean, if somebody has an accident because they just bought some retreads, you know, and a tire blows out, or there's some other kind of mechanical failure in their car, we might not hold them legally responsible. And soft determinism would not hold them legally responsible. So compatibilism, soft determinism, same thing. So that's something in favor of compatibilism. It's the hardest view to understand. But now, if I follow my desire and got a cup of coffee, and so I had the metaphysical freedom to act and get a cup of coffee or not do so this morning, right? And I acted according to my own desire to do so. So to a compatibilist, I acted freely. But where does determinism come into play? Why is it soft determinism. Well, a self-determinist still can hold that a unique causal past determines a unique future. In other words, that given the same causal past, and also my causal past is what determined my desires. Yes, I have metaphysical freedom because I acted according to my desires, but my desires were determined by my causal past for the compatibilists. And so for a libertarian like Sartre or Descartes, that's not enough. You know, we want the freedom to say, all prior causes being the same, we could have chosen differently. For both the soft and hard determinists, the answer is we could not have chosen differently. So that's why soft determinism is determinism. Whereas for libertarianism, given the same causal past, if I chose A the first time, given the same causal past, I have metaphysical freedom. I have the freedom to go against what the atoms and molecules are doing and choose B the next time. And so Sartre is an example of libertarianism. And again, in part, he thinks that our biggest decisions in life, I hate it when these things go to sleep when you're recording, because now I don't know if it still shows up on the recording or not, but let's get it down to Sartre. So he's an example of libertarianism. Sartre says, look, I mean, a lot of our choices are determined, excuse me, not by something in our causal past. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I'd pass this around. Not by atoms and molecules banging around, but by things in our future, by plans and projections we make about who and what we want to make of ourselves. And so how can that be conditioned by something in our causal past? In one example, he talks about, I think, Charlemagne building Constantinople, building a whole city by planning it out beforehand and then bringing that plan to light. That's what they did with Columbia. You know, Columbia, Maryland, I know many of you are from out of state, was a pre-planned city by the Rouse Company, the same company that built the, you know, stuff down the Inner Harbor, you know, the big shopping area, I forget. So existentialism, and Sartre's unusual because a lot of the people who advocate libertarianism are dualists, like Descartes, like Augustine, like Plato and Socrates. They think that we have an immaterial part to us that is not entirely conditioned by the laws of nature in the physical world. Whereas Sartre is an atheist, and presumably he does not think that we have an eternal soul that's going to be somewhere after we die. But nonetheless, he thinks we're such that we can plan our futures and make decisions without being conditioned by anything in our causal past. So, well, basically, the two kinds of existentialists, we're not going to say much about that. Religious existentialists who are usually liberal theologians. They're not conservative evangelical theologians. They're theologians who think you can reinterpret the Bible according to existentialism. You know, and atheistic existentialists, and Sartre is an atheistic existentialist. He follows the 19th century philosopher Nietzsche in accepting Nietzsche's claim that God is dead. Now, of course, what Nietzsche meant by that was not that the God of the Bible once lived and then somehow passed away, but basically what Nietzsche was saying is that you know, the whole idea that we need a God in our lives to cope with reality and to explain things is outmoded and should be done away with. And of course that would be Sartre's view as an atheist. So if humans were created by God, they would be like a created object like a paper knife or a coffee cup or a cell phone. In other words, their essence, the essential characteristics that make them what they are, like the essence of a triangle is that it's a plane geometric figure with 3 sides and 3 interior angles that add up to 180 degrees. So the essence of a human being would be determined by God in God's plan before the first human being was ever made, right? God would have a concept of what a human being is supposed to be that would specify the essential characteristics of the human being, the essence of a human being. And so, for human beings, as for created objects like a paper knife or a cell phone, their essence would precede their existence. That is, the plan for what a human being was going to be would exist before the first human being was ever created by God. But now, as an atheistic existentialist, Sartre wants to drop God out of the picture. So what happens after you do that? Well, then there is no God around to have any concept of human nature. And so Sartre says we first exist, then we define what it is to be a human being, and we do this collectively and individually. So for the existentialists, both the religious and the secular existentialists like Sartre, existence precedes essence, not the other way around. We first exist, then we define our essence. And this is a version of humanism because it says man is the measure of all things. That is, truth is not out there for us to be discovered like people like Aristotle and Descartes and Plato thought. We essentially make up the truth. So the first principle of existentialism is that we're exactly what we make ourselves to be, nothing more, nothing less. And so the basis of our responsibility is for Sartre the fact that we make totally free choices in determining our essence. Both as human beings, what's to count as human? We had talks. I'm forced to give them an oral presentation at Essex. And so I had them focus on a song or a movie with a philosophic theme. Somebody did I, Robot. You know, the question is, would a cyborg be a human being? Well, for somebody who's not an existentialist, they might think, well, you know, the answer to that is going to be found when we learn more about human beings and learn more about cyborgs, right? Whereas for somebody who's a humanist, like Richard Rorty, who some of you did extra credits on, like Sartre, we collectively, as human beings, decide who we're going to let into the club. And the answer to whether or not a cyborg is going to be a human being is determined by how we as human beings want to define what it is to be a human being and whether we want to let them in. So the truth of what a human being is, in other words, we decide what the essence of a human being is going to be collectively, and it depends on whether we want to define it such that cyborgs are going to qualify or they're not. Now, we also, for Sartre, define who we are going to be as an individual person, as a human being, by deciding what we want to be, making future plans. What do I want to make of myself? Do I want to be a teacher, a social worker, an engineer, a computer scientist, you know, a computer tech or something, a software programmer? And then that future projection has a bearing on what decisions we make freely now, right? You people are here because you all want to be professional philosophers when you get out of here. You say, no, no, right? No, you all have some career path that requires that you have 3 hours general education credit in liberal arts, and one of the ways you could do that is to take a philosophy course. And there may be at least one person in here for whom that's the same. Try everybody in here, right? You know, I mean, I'm not you know, kidding myself. I realize very few people will go into philosophy, although it is one of those things that, yes, the whole thing is top-heavy with Caucasian males. Now, it's changed a lot in the last 20 years, but it is, you know, an area where people of any minority are sought after, you know, in the job market. Whereas if you go into sociology, everybody's going into sociology or you know, public administration. So it is, I mean, it's not a totally irrational choice, you know, for an African-American person to think about going on and doing graduate work in philosophy. Anyway, let's get back to our buddy Jean-Paul here. So now, to get back to free choices, for Sartre then, his one big no-no is do not act in bad faith, mauvaise foi. And how do we do this? Well, we do this by trying to shirk our responsibility that comes with our freedom by pretending that something in our past conditions us to not be free, either our environment or our genetics or a very rigid traditional morality. For Sartre, if we claim that we did not act freely because our choices were either environmentally determined or genetically determined or determined by a pre-existing morality, we're acting in bad faith, he says. We're trying to reduce ourselves as human beings back down to the level of things. Things he calls being in itself. And they do follow the laws of nature, like this cup of coffee. And we're trying to reduce ourselves to that, but Sartre says we are being for itself, être pour soi. We're for ourselves, and we can make free choices for ourselves and determine our destiny in a way that this cup of coffee cannot. or my cell phone. So we try to escape our responsibility and freedom by pretending we're determined, and doing that is to act in bad faith. So let me go down here. I just mentioned a lot of this stuff. So we already covered determinism. Sartre, of course, is not a determinist. The correct view for his view is libertarianism, but it's not to be confused with the political view of libertarianism. A political libertarian like Rand Paul is a small government guy, somebody who believes that the government that governs best governs least, and that we should be left alone by government as individuals. We should be given the maximum amount of liberty in our choices, consistent with not stepping on other people's free choices. That's political libertarianism. That's not what we mean here. Libertarianism here is the view that we can make free choices, that all causes being the same in our past, we could have chosen differently. That we are not conditioned by our causal past. We're not forced to make the choices we make. If I chose A for a libertarian, but not for a soft or hard determinist, if I chose A instead of B, given the same causal past for a libertarian, I could choose B the next time. Okay. So the meaning of facticity. Well, okay, here's where Sartre kind of gives it away. I'm going to let that thing ring. Somebody's robocall again. Basically, Sartre says, well, he responds to criticisms that there are things that we don't have a total unlimited ability to choose whatever we want to do, right? You all couldn't decide to just, rather than take the stairs of the elevator, jump out that window without it having some pretty bad consequences, if that window could open, right? We can't drink poison and not be hurt. We can't walk across North Avenue at rush hour and have automobiles bounce off of us. But then again, so Sartre says, but we can choose not to cross the street, or if somebody honks at us because we're in their way while we're crossing the street, we can bang on their hood and assert our freedom of choice. But Sartre misses the point. The point is, we can't make ourselves such that we can flap our arms and fly, or so that cyanide doesn't hurt us, or so that buses are going to bounce off of us instead of the other way around. In other words, there are things about who we are as human beings that are already set in stone, and we can't. We're constrained by a lot of things. We can't make the kinds of unlimited free choices about who we're going to be that Sartre wants to claim that we can make. So that's a negative. So I think when talking about facticity, the things in our causal past that seem to limit our choices, I think Sartre kind of gives away the game and hints at the fact that we're not as free as to make our own essence as he would like to think we are. Okay. So again, he wants us to rebel against others' attacks on freedom. Mill and utilitarianism. So for a consequentialist theory like utilitarianism, remember egoism and utilitarianism, a lot of you wrote on egoism. It's ethical egoism that's a form of consequentialism that says my moral duty is to promote for myself the best balance of good versus bad consequences. I'm going to stop in just a couple of minutes. Whereas utilitarianism and consequentialist theory say it's consequences alone that determine the moral rightness or wrongness of what we do. Okay. I'm going to pause this. I don't know if I'll have time, but I want to give out these papers because some of you, I don't want to make anybody late because you're waiting for me to give you your term paper. Had some real good papers. And back to utilitarianism, I mean, there is a review of that's recorded if you feel like you want to go over it again. Basically, I didn't do that. What I like to do for the review sheet is to start from the stuff that we did farthest back for any test period and work up. Yeah, and of course we went through utilitarianism very recently, and there are recordings for going through the PowerPoint. So, okay, so your exam then is 10 o'clock on Monday. You get 10 to 11:50, and bring a number 2 pencil, even though I'll have some. One way to guarantee you have a good one is to bring your own. Number 2 pencil, blow 43 cents on a Scantron if you haven't done so already. And your essay. Very important to get your essay in on time because Monday is the last time I'm going to be on campus until the end of January. Okay? So, anyway. So, take care. Have a good weekend. If a question comes up, you can, you can text, you can email me, but do it to both emails so that I get a notice from Gmail on my phone, since the Coppin one is not synced to the phone. Okay, so you're okay. Yeah, and if you have any extra credits, try to turn them in by Monday. Okay.
For extra credit, were we allowed to handwrite it?
Yeah. Yeah, for extra credits, folks, I just had a question. You don't have to type them. You can handwrite them. That's yeah. No, that's perfectly fine. So that's good.
I told myself to pick it last Friday because I was sick on Wednesday.
Okay. Well, I probably just haven't gotten. But so when would it be? So remember, I have class till 12 because I have the 11 o'clock class in here now, and then I'm gonna be.
How does like 1:15, 1:30 sound?
Okay, yeah, that's good because I'll go down and get a sandwich in the meantime. 6:27.
Okay.
Yeah, and if the doors close, just knock.
If you're not there, I'll just wait for you.
Yeah, well, yeah, because I will,
Eventually be there.
Right.
I'll be ready.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I just had extra credit to turn, but that's
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's good.
We had an essay to turn in. What's the file?
Yes, that's the essay pool.
Oh, really?
I went through that. I
wasn't here.
I went through that and explained what I wanted. Well, I gave that out, Monday, and I went through it. So there's integrity recording of a review of that. Yeah, so you might want to look at that.
Okay.